Am I the a-hole for asking my sister to pay back a very large loan I gave her years ago, now that I'm in a financial crisis? This is a situation that's been brewing for a while, but it's really blown up recently, and I honestly don't know if I handled it correctly, or if years of resentment and stress have made me the bad guy. This is a throwaway because various family members are on Reddit. For context, I, 41M, have one sibling, my younger sister, Sarah, 39F. We've always been relatively close, typical sibling stuff growing up, shared friends, etc. Our parents are good people, hardworking, but never had a ton of money. We learned to be pretty independent and resourceful. I got a degree in engineering, and Sarah pursued something more creative, which initially was harder to make a stable living from. About 10 years ago, Sarah was in a really bad spot. She had sunk all her savings into a small business idea that was struggling hard, like on the brink of bankruptcy, about to lose her apartment, defaulting on loans kind of hard. Our parents couldn't help much, maybe a few thousand, but nothing significant enough to make a dent. Sarah was incredibly stressed, talking about having to move back home, give up her dream, potentially damage her credit for years. She was really at her lowest point. At the time, I was in a relatively stable financial position. I was working, living comfortably though not extravagantly, and had managed to save up a decent chunk of money, enough for a down payment on a house I was hoping to buy in the next year or two. Sarah came to me absolutely desperate. She laid out her situation, showed me her books, and explained that if she just had a significant cash infusion, she was confident she could turn things around. It wasn't a small amount she needed. She needed $70,000. This was huge for me. Absolutely huge. That 70K represented years of careful saving, sacrifices, and my immediate future plans. Giving it to her meant putting my own goals on hold indefinitely. However, seeing her so distraught, knowing her potential and feeling that sibling bond, I decided to do it. We had a conversation. It wasn't super formal with lawyers, but it wasn't just a casual chat either. We sat down, went over the numbers again, and she promised, absolutely promised, that she would pay me back. She said she'd draw up a repayment plan as soon as the business stabilized, and the goal was to pay it back as quickly as possible, ideally within 3 to 5 years once things were really going. She was incredibly grateful, tearful, and swore she wouldn't forget this. I told her I trusted her, but also gently reminded her that this was my future house money, and I really did need it back eventually. There was no written contract, just texts confirming the amount and emails showing the transfer, plus our verbal agreement on principle and intent to repay. I know. Hindsight is 20/20, and Reddit will crucify me for not getting it in writing. But she's my sister, and she was about to lose literally everything. So I transferred her the $70,000, and for a while it seemed like the best investment I ever made, emotionally anyway. The money infusion worked. Sarah was able to pay off urgent debts, inject capital into inventory and marketing, and stabilize the business. Within a year, she was out of the red. Within 2 years, she was profitable. And within 5 years, her business was genuinely thriving. During these years, she would occasionally mention the money, saying she hadn't forgotten, but things were still tight with reinvesting in the business, etc. I didn't push. My own financial situation remained stable. I was still working, still saving, albeit from scratch again. I figured as long as things were good with her, and I didn't desperately need it, I'd let her focus on building her security. She bought a nice new car, moved into a bigger apartment, went on nice vacations, eventually bought a really lovely house in a great neighborhood. She got married a few years ago to a great guy who doesn't know the full extent of the loan, I think, or maybe nothing about it at all. And they live what looks like a very comfortable life. She'd occasionally offer me dinner or a nice gift saying thanks for everything, and I genuinely appreciated it, but the $70K repayment never materialized. No plan was ever drawn up. When the 5-year mark passed, I gently brought it up. I said something like, "Hey Sarah, now that things are really stable with the business and you're settled, any thoughts on starting to pay back that loan?" She was a little cagey. Said things were good, but still a lot tied up in the business, payroll, investments, future expansion plans, savings for rainy days, etc. She reiterated she hadn't forgotten. Maybe next year. I felt a little disappointed, but she sounded busy and stressed about business stuff, so I backed off again. This pattern repeated a couple of times over the next few years, me hinting or gently asking, her giving vague answers about it not being the right time, money being tied up. I admit, I felt a growing knot of anxiety about it, but I hated the idea of causing conflict over money, especially with my sister who I'd helped in her time of need. I told myself she'd get to it when she could. Then my situation changed dramatically and unexpectedly. About 6 months ago, I was laid off from my job. My industry took a hit, and my position was eliminated. It wasn't performance-related, but that didn't make it any less devastating. Finding a new job in this market is tough, and the prospects aren't great. My emergency fund is okay, but it's dwindling faster than I'm comfortable with. On top of that, shortly after the layoff, I received a pretty significant health diagnosis. Nothing life-threatening right now, thankfully, but it requires ongoing treatment, specialist visits, and medication that, even with good insurance, has substantial co-pays and deductibles. The medical bills are starting to pile up on top of my lack of income. Suddenly, that $70,000 isn't just future house money or money she owes me. It's money I desperately need to cover essential living expenses and medical bills while I'm unemployed and potentially facing long-term health costs. My own financial crisis hit hard and fast. About 2 months ago, after staring at my bank balance and a pile of medical bills, I called Sarah. I explained my situation, the layoff, the health issues, the bills piling up. I was honest about being stressed and needing access to funds I had helped her with all those years ago. I wasn't demanding or aggressive. I just laid out the facts of my current dire need. I said something like, "Sarah, remember that money I loaned you back then? With everything that's happened, I'm really in a tough spot and I need that money back. I know it's a large amount, but even starting with a significant portion or a concrete, aggressive repayment plan would help me immensely right now." Her reaction is why I'm writing this. It wasn't understanding or sympathetic. She got defensive almost immediately. She said she was sorry about my job and health, but her money was tied up. She talked about business expenses, payroll, taxes, and future investments. She was planning. She mentioned her mortgage, her kids, she had 2 in the last few years, future education savings, their extracurriculars. She basically painted a picture of someone who also has significant financial obligations and couldn't just magic $70,000 out of thin air. She said I was being unfair to ask for it back all at once or even quickly because it had been so long and her circumstances had changed too. I have kids now, OP. She implied that I hadn't needed it for so long, so why was it suddenly an emergency for her to pay it back? She seemed to minimize my situation compared to the needs of her thriving business and her family's lifestyle. She even said something to the effect of, "Family helps family, but you're acting like a bank trying to foreclose." I was floored. I reminded her that family helps family was why I gave her the money when she needed it to avoid ruin, and that she promised to pay me back, and that my current need was every bit as urgent as hers was back then, perhaps more so given the health aspect. I said I wasn't asking for it to buy a fancy car or go on vacation. I needed it to live and pay bills. She got even more upset, accused me of not understanding business finance, of being selfish for trying to take money away from her family's security, the money that used to be mine, that I needed for my security back then. The conversation devolved into an argument, with her saying hurtful things about me not being prepared for unexpected life events, implying my situation was my fault somehow, and me pointing out her comfortable lifestyle compared to my struggle, and that she seemed to conveniently forget her promises now that the shoe was on the other foot. We haven't really spoken properly since that call. Our parents have gotten involved, or at least heard about it. Mom is trying to mediate, saying we both have valid points and that money shouldn't ruin family. Dad seems to be leaning towards Sarah's side, saying I should have gotten something in writing, and that you can't expect someone to just have that kind of money sitting around after so many years, especially with a family and business. They're urging me to be understanding and patient, which feels a lot like siding with her. and letting her off the hook, while I'm the one without income and facing medical costs. I'm stressed, I'm scared about my financial future and health, and I'm hurt and angry at my sister's apparent lack of empathy and refusal to honor her commitment when I need it most. But the way she reacted, and my parents' reactions, have made me second-guess myself. Was I too harsh in asking? Was it unreasonable to expect the full amount or even a substantial portion relatively quickly after so many years? Should I have just accepted that family meant the loan became a gift over time because I didn't push harder sooner? Is it my fault for not being more prepared financially for unemployment and illness, and I shouldn't be relying on a decade-old loan? Am I the a-hole for causing this massive family rift by demanding money back from my successful sister when I'm down and out? Am I the a-hole? So I, 31 have been with my fiancé David, 32 for 5 years. We got engaged about 8 months ago, and things were honestly great leading up to this. We have a really solid relationship built on mutual respect, similar values, at least on most things. Our families are pretty different, though. Mine is firmly middle class. My parents are retired teachers. They live comfortably but aren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. David's family, on the other hand, is very wealthy. His dad owns a successful chain of businesses. His mum comes from old money. They live in a huge house, multiple vacation properties, country club memberships, the works. It's not something they flaunt obnoxiously, but the difference is just there. It's the air they breathe. When we got engaged, David's parents, let's call them Phil and Mill, were thrilled. They immediately, and I mean immediately, offered to pay for the entire wedding. Their words were something like, "This is our gift to you both. We want you to have the wedding of your dreams without worrying about the cost." David and I were floored and incredibly grateful. My parents, bless them, had quietly mentioned they could contribute maybe 10K, which I knew was a stretch for them, and I had planned to refuse most of it anyway. Happy to have a smaller wedding, we could mostly fund ourselves. So the in-laws' offer was huge. It felt incredibly generous. The planning started, and that's when things got complicated. Initially, I was excited. I had a Pinterest board, some ideas, nothing crazy expensive, because even with their offer, I felt weird about going too over the top on someone else's dime. But every time I suggested something modest or even just reasonable, MIL would gently steer us towards something more opulent. "Oh, that venue is lovely, dear, but have you considered the Chateau Valois? It's so much more us." Meaning they're us. "That dress is sweet, but the designer trunk show is next week. We should really look at something truly special. A local band would be fun, but for a truly memorable night, the Royal Strings Orchestra is simply unparalleled." It felt less like planning our wedding and more like approving options from a pre-selected, incredibly expensive menu chosen by MIL. David was aware of it, and he'd sometimes try to push back gently, saying things like, "Mum, Sarah really likes," to the idea of, but he didn't seem to grasp how much it was starting to grind on me. He kept saying, "They're paying Sarah, just let them do it. It makes them happy." While I appreciated their generosity, I also felt like I was losing control, that our vision was being completely steamrolled. The guest list became a major point of contention. We had our list, about 100 people, close family, friends we've known for years. The in-laws, however, added about 150 people to their list, mostly their business associates, distant cousins I'd never heard of, people from their various clubs. When I asked about it, MIL said, "Well, darling, it's a celebration of our families joining, and these are important people in our lives." I pointed out that it wasn't just a celebration of families joining, but specifically our marriage, and we barely knew these people. FIL chimed in, "Don't worry about it, it's all covered. The more the merrier. Besides, some of these connections could be good for David's future." That comment really stung. Suddenly it felt less like a gift and more like an investment in their social and business network, thinly veiled as our wedding. Then came the tipping point. We were discussing the menu tasting. MIL had booked it at a ridiculously fancy Michelin star restaurant, the caterer for the wedding, of course. She sent over the proposed menu, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen. Foie gras terrine, wagyu beef, saffron risotto, etc. All sounds amazing, I know, but it was just so much, and so far removed from anything David and I or my family would ever typically eat or choose. At the bottom of the email, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned the seating chart planning. "We'll need to finalize the seating soon, darling. I've put together a preliminary chart focusing on integrating our key business contacts and ensuring complementary conversation among the tables. We can slot your core wedding party and close family in once the main structure is done." That was it, integrating their key business contacts as the main structure. My family, my friends, the people who actually knew us as a couple, were an afterthought to be slotted in. I lost it, not in front of Mill thankfully, but later that day with David. I told him I couldn't do it anymore. I felt like an extra in my own wedding. I felt like a prop in their social event. I felt like their generosity came with invisible strings that were tightening around my throat. I said I didn't want their money if it meant our wedding wasn't ours. I said maybe we should just go to the courthouse or have a small backyard BBQ, if that's all we could afford ourselves, because at least it would be authentic to us. David got upset. He said I was being ungrateful, that I was insulting his parents who were being incredibly generous. He accused me of having pride issues and not appreciating what they were doing for us. He said I was risking a huge rift with his family right before we were supposed to join it. He said I was focusing on the wrong things and that the point was we were getting married, not who was paying or who was on the guest list. I told him the guest list and the control was the point, because it showed that they saw this as their event, not ours, and his refusal to see that was just as hurtful as his parents' actions. I said their gift felt more like a transaction where we were trading our autonomy for their money. The argument was bad. Really bad. We haven't said anything to his parents yet, but David is refusing to see my side at all. He thinks I'm being ridiculously difficult and throwing away an amazing opportunity because of my ego. He says I need to apologize to him for what I said about his family and learn to appreciate their generosity instead of looking for ways to be offended. I'm questioning if he's right. Maybe I'm being ungrateful. They are offering a wedding beyond anything we could afford. Maybe it's naive to accept that kind of money without expecting them to have significant input. Maybe I should just suck it up, smile, and get through their version of our wedding for the sake of future harmony. But the thought of it makes me feel genuinely sick. I don't want to start my marriage feeling like I compromised on something so fundamental just because we were bought and paid for. So, am I the a-hole for being ungrateful and wanting control over our wedding? Even though my fiancé's wealthy, parents are paying for the whole thing and feel entitled to shape it. I, 32M, just married the absolute love of my life, Sarah, 31F. We've been together for 5 years, living together for 3, and planning this wedding has been a journey. We both come from moderately large families, but mine is the one with the most drama ingrained in its DNA. Specifically, my cousin, Mark, 34M. Mark has always been the golden boy, or at least he sees himself that way. He's charming when he wants to be, can talk his way out of anything, and genuinely believes the rules don't apply to him. We've had a distant but generally polite relationship for most of our lives, the kind where you see each other at major family functions and make small talk. The problem isn't just Mark, though. It's his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Tiffany, 30F. Tiffany is a lot. She's loud, attention-seeking, and has a history of causing scenes at family gatherings. The most notable incident was at my Aunt Carol's 60th birthday 2 years ago, where she got blackout drunk and cornered my grandmother, loudly complaining about how she wasn't getting enough attention from Mark and how my family clearly didn't. Like her, culminating in her yelling at my Uncle Robert when he tried to gently intervene. She ended up storming out alone, leaving Mark to sheepishly apologize. There have been other smaller incidents, rude comments making everything about her, generally just being unpleasant to be around. Because of this history, Sarah and I made a really difficult decision. We decided not to invite Tiffany to the wedding. We knew it would be awkward, but honestly, the thought of her potentially ruining or disrupting our special day was causing Sarah a significant amount of stress. The wedding venue wasn't huge. We were trying to keep things intimate, around 120 guests, and every guest was carefully considered. We knew this wasn't a popular decision with just Mark, but honestly, most of the family privately agreed with us, sighing with relief when they heard she wasn't on the guest list. We were very clear with Mark when his invitation went out. It was addressed only to him. When he texted asking about a +1, we gently but firmly explained that due to space constraints and wanting to keep it a smaller, family-focused event, only invited guests were on the list, and Tiffany wasn't included. We didn't explicitly bring up her past behavior in that text, just focused on the guest list limit. Mark pushed back hard. He said it was unfair that she was his long-term partner, even though they frequently break up, and that we were being cruel. We held our ground. We said we understood he was upset, but our decision was final. He got huffy, but eventually seemed to drop it, saying, "Fine, whatever. I'll just come alone then." This was about 6 months ago. Wedding planning continued. The usual stresses: vendors, seating charts, RSVPs missing. We had a few minor family dramas, but nothing major. The seating chart specifically had Mark at a table with some other cousins and friends, with an empty seat next to him, because it was a table of 8, and we had 7 people there. There was no +1 accounted for, either on the RSVP or the seating chart. Fast forward to 2 days ago, the wedding day itself. It was beautiful. The ceremony was lovely, maybe a minor hiccup with a flower girl, but nothing significant. We headed to the reception venue. Everyone was mingling, cocktails flowing. The atmosphere was perfect. Sarah and I were feeling euphoric. We were positioned near the entrance greeting guests, taking photos, soaking it all in. Then Mark arrived. He didn't arrive alone. He walked in, beaming, with Tiffany on his arm. My gut completely dropped. Sarah's smile faltered immediately. We exchanged a look of pure dread and disbelief. I honestly thought my brain was misinterpreting what I was seeing for a second. But no, there they were. Tiffany, in a rather flashy dress that seemed designed to draw attention, clutching Mark's arm and smiling widely. They walked right up to us as if everything was normal. Mark gave me a backslap, said, "Hey man, congrats," and gesturing to Tiffany added, "Hope you don't mind, brought a +1 after all. Couldn't imagine coming without her." I was stunned into silence for a moment. Sarah recovered faster, her voice tight but polite. "Mark, you know Tiffany wasn't invited." Mark's smile evaporated. He leaned in slightly as if this was a quiet, private conversation, even though we were right by the entrance and other guests were arriving. "Yeah, well, she's my girlfriend. Of course she's coming, don't be ridiculous." "Mark, we talked about this," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly with suppressed anger and shock. "We were very clear. Tiffany is not on the guest list. We don't have a seat for her, we don't have a meal counted for her. This is incredibly inappropriate." "Oh, please," Tiffany interjected, her voice a little too loud. "Like a few extra plates." "Matter, it's a wedding, not a rigid school dinner. Don't be so dramatic." This is where my carefully constructed composure started to crack. "Dramatic? Tiffany, you were explicitly not invited. You showing up like this is incredibly disrespectful to us on our wedding day." Mark cut in, getting defensive. "She's with me. You invited me. She comes with me. It's how it works. It's rude of you to exclude her." "No, Mark, it's rude of you to disregard our clear wishes and show up with an uninvited guest, especially when we specifically discussed this," Sarah said, her voice firmer now. Other guests were starting to slow down, glancing over, sensing the tension. Mark must have noticed because his tone shifted slightly, though still annoyed. "Look, we're here now, just let us in, don't make a scene." "You're the one making a scene by showing up like this," I said, my voice rising slightly despite myself. "We cannot and will not accommodate an uninvited guest, especially when that guest is someone we specifically chose not to invite." Tiffany then started doing this performative look of hurt and offense. "Wow, I can't believe you're doing this. On your wedding day? Making your own cousin's girlfriend feel unwelcome? After all this family has put me through." "Tiffany, you need to stop," Sarah said sharply. "You are not an invited guest. Mark, you had a choice and you chose to ignore our boundaries. Because you brought an uninvited person, you cannot attend either. I'm sorry, but you both need to leave." Mark's jaw dropped. Are you serious? You're kicking me out. Your own family. You left us no choice, Mark, I said, feeling a wave of something cold and firm wash over my initial shock and anger. You disrespected us and our wedding by bringing someone who wasn't invited after we specifically told you not to. You are not welcome here if you cannot respect our wishes. Mark turned red. He started raising his voice. This is unbelievable. You're choosing to ruin your own cousin's night over a +1? This is low, even for you. He gestured wildly to the reception hall. Everyone's inside. You're going to make a spectacle of this. At this point, the venue's event manager, who had been subtly hovering nearby as the confrontation escalated, stepped forward professionally. Is everything all right here? Can I assist? Yes, you can, I said, turning to him. These two individuals are not on the guest list and I need them escorted out. Mark absolutely lost it then. He started yelling about how I was a terrible person, how I was ruining his evening and humiliating him in front of the family, how I'd clearly changed since getting with Sarah, implying she was somehow controlling me, and how he would never forgive me for this. Tiffany started making loud, dramatic gasps and saying how she'd never been so insulted in her life. It was exactly the kind of scene we had wanted to avoid, but they were the ones creating it by showing up and refusing to leave gracefully. The manager signaled to a security staff member, and between the manager and security, they calmly but firmly guided Mark and Tiffany back towards the exit, despite their loud protests and Mark's continued yelling. He actually yelled something like, "You'll regret this," as he was being escorted out. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 to 10 minutes, but felt like an eternity. By the time they were gone, a significant number of arriving guests had witnessed the whole thing. There was an immediate, awkward silence, followed by a flurry of whispers. My parents rushed over, looking mortified and stressed. Sarah's parents looked concerned. We tried our best to shake it off and continue the evening. We apologized to guests who had witnessed it, explaining briefly that there was an issue with uninvited guests. We went through the motions, the first dance, the speeches, dinner. But the shadow of that confrontation hung over everything, at least for us. We could see people talking in hushed tones, glancing in our direction. Since the wedding, my phone has been blowing up, not just with congratulatory messages, but with messages about this. My parents are upset, not necessarily defending Mark and Tiffany's actions, but saying we should have handled it differently, maybe just let them stay to avoid the scene, or pulled Mark aside earlier. Other family members are split. Some agree, with us completely, that Mark was incredibly rude and disrespectful and got exactly what he deserved. Others think we were too harsh, that it was our wedding day and we should have just let it go for the sake of peace, that kicking out family was an overreaction that caused a bigger scene than just accommodating them. A few of Mark's closer relatives are furious with us, saying we humiliated him and ruined their night too by proxy. They think we should have anticipated he'd bring her and prepared for it, or just given him a +1 originally, even if we didn't like Tiffany. They're saying we're family destroyers, and that this could cause a permanent rift. Sarah is standing by me saying we did the right thing by enforcing our boundary, especially given the history and the explicit conversation we had with Mark. She's upset that her wedding day was partially marred by the drama, but she's not blaming me for the decision to kick them out, only that it had to happen at all. But hearing all the backlash, the accusations of being cruel and overreactive, it's starting to make me question myself. Maybe I should have just let them stay and dealt with the awkwardness, or moved someone around, or just paid for an extra meal. Was preserving the perfect guest list worth the very public confrontation and the potential long-term damage to family relationships? It was our day, but family is important too. Did I cross a line by having my own cousin physically removed from my wedding? So, Reddit. Am I the a-hole for kicking my cousin and his explicitly uninvited girlfriend out of my wedding reception when they showed up unexpectedly after being told she wasn't invited? Okay, this is going to be long. Please bear with me. I wanted to get all the context out because my family is absolutely losing their minds right now. And while a big part of me feels completely justified, the sheer level of anger and hurt directed at me is making me question everything. I really need outside perspectives. So the cabin, it's a small place up north, been in our family for 3 generations. My grandparents built it, my parents inherited it, and when they passed away about 10 years ago, it was left equally to me and my 2 siblings, Sarah, older sister 48, and Tom, younger brother 40. I'm 44. The will explicitly stated it was to be owned jointly and ideally kept in the family for shared use. My parents loved that place. It held a lot of memories for all of us, childhood summers, holiday weekends, just getting away from it all. It wasn't fancy, pretty rustic actually, but it was ours. When my parents were alive, they handled all the upkeep. It needed constant work. Leaky roof, aging septic system, drafty windows, old plumbing, the usual for a place built in the 50s. My dad was pretty handy, and my mom managed paying for things and coordinating repairs. Sarah, Tom, and I would visit with our families when we could, pitch in with small chores like raking leaves or chopping a bit of wood, but the heavy lifting was on my parents. After they passed, things shifted. The will was clear, joint ownership. But nobody really wanted the responsibility that came with it. We had a few awkward family meetings in the beginning about how we'd manage it. We talked about setting up a joint account, contributing equally to maintenance, creating a schedule for usage. Sarah was really keen on keeping the family legacy alive and having a place for all the cousins, our kids, to make memories together, just like we did. Tom was mostly excited about having a free place to vacation. I was somewhere in the middle. I loved the cabin too, but I also saw how much work it needed and felt a sense of dread about taking over that burden. Pretty quickly, those initial plans fell apart. The joint account idea never fully materialized. We'd occasionally scrape together money for a specific, urgent repair, but there was no regular contribution for general maintenance or future needs. The scheduling was always a hassle. Everyone wanted prime weeks in the summer, and it often led to squabbles. Sarah felt her family being older should get priority. Tom, being less financially stable, relied on the cabin as his main vacation option and wanted guaranteed time. My family, my wife and 2 kids, were more flexible, partly because my job allowed for more varied time off, and partly because I felt I had to be, to keep the peace. The biggest issue, though, was the maintenance. Remember how I said my parents did all the heavy lifting? Well, that responsibility slowly but surely started falling almost exclusively on me. I have a knack for fixing things, similar to my dad, and I live the closest to the cabin, about a 3-hour drive while Sarah is 5 hours away and Tom is 6. Whenever something went wrong, and things always went wrong, I was the one who got the call. A pipe burst in the winter. I drove up to shut off the water and call a plumber, then went back later to assess damage. The roof started leaking, badly. I spent weeks researching options, getting quotes, and ultimately took time off work to be there when the roofers came, coordinating everything. The septic system backed up. Guess who spent a disgusting weekend dealing with that? My siblings were sympathetic, sure. "Oh, that sounds awful, OP," Sarah would say. "Thanks so much for handling it." Tom would offer vague promises to help out next time or chip in more when he could, but the help rarely materialized beyond helping carry groceries during their own visits. The financial contributions were even more sporadic. For major things, we'd split it 3 ways, but often after a lot of hassling on my part to get them to send the money. For smaller ongoing costs, property taxes, insurance, electricity, internet, which I set up because they complained about not having it, basic supplies, minor repairs I just handled myself. I ended up covering the lion's share because trying to get them to track and reimburse me for every little expense felt like pulling teeth and caused arguments. I estimate that over the past decade, I've personally invested probably 3 or 4 times what Sarah and Tom combined have put into the cabin, both in terms of direct costs I didn't get reimbursed for, and more significantly, in sweat equity and coordination time. And despite all this, I still got complaints. Sarah would visit and critique how I'd arranged the furniture, or if the decorations weren't traditional cabin style enough. Never mind, I was the one buying and hauling new furniture when the old stuff fell apart. Tom would complain if the internet was slow, or if a certain amenity wasn't available, again things I paid for or spent time setting up. They'd leave messes for me to clean up before the next family arrived, or use up all the firewood I'd chopped and stacked. It felt like I was the unpaid, unappreciated caretaker and property manager for a place they felt entitled to enjoy, without contributing proportionally. This went on for years. I grew increasingly resentful. My wife saw it and encouraged me to either talk to them frankly or step back. Every time I tried talking about contributions or the uneven workload, it would dissolve into them saying they appreciated me, which felt hollow, or that they didn't have as much free time or money as I did, which might have been true in part, but didn't excuse zero effort, or that I was changing the spirit of the cabin by trying to formalize things. Sarah would always bring it back to family togetherness, which felt manipulative when she wasn't contributing to making the place actually usable for that togetherness. Last year, a major issue came up. The foundation needed serious work. Cracks had appeared, and a structural engineer said it needed immediate attention to prevent significant, expensive damage. This wasn't a small fix. We were talking tens of thousands of dollars. I got quotes. I presented them to Sarah and Tom. Sarah immediately freaked out about the cost. Tom said he absolutely couldn't afford his share right now, or probably any time in the near future. I was at my breaking point. I told them I was not going to front the entire cost myself for a repair on a property we jointly owned, only to maybe get reimbursed years later. I explained that I was already carrying the burden of most other costs and all the labor. I said we had 3 options. 1, we all figure out a way to contribute equally. 2, we sell the cabin to fund the repairs for my portion of ownership. Effectively, I could buy them out at a reduced price due to the needed repairs, or we sell on the open market and split the lesser value. Or 3, I figure out a way to pay for the repairs myself, but under terms I set. Sarah was horrified at the idea of selling. We can't sell the cabin, it's family history. Tom was just quiet, looking stressed about the money. After a lot of stressful conversations that went nowhere, I made a difficult decision. I told them I would take on finding and paying for the foundation repairs myself. It would be a significant financial strain, requiring me to dip heavily into savings and potentially take out equity on my own home. However, if I was doing this, I needed something in return. I wasn't asking them to sign over their ownership, but I told them that in exchange for me funding and managing this huge, necessary repair that benefited all of us by saving the cabin, I would need exclusive use of the cabin for the entire upcoming summer season. My reasoning was this: the repairs themselves would be extensive and take weeks, maybe months, rendering the cabin unusable for part of the summer anyway. Even when the major structural work was potentially done, there would be follow-up work, landscaping disturbed by the repair, etc. It wouldn't be the pleasant relaxation spot they envisioned for their vacations. I needed unrestricted access to coordinate with contractors. Frankly, after years of carrying the load and now taking on this massive financial and logistical burden, I felt I deserved to have exclusive use for a period. My own family rarely got prime, uninterrupted time at the cabin because I was always accommodating their schedules or dealing with emergencies. I wanted one summer where my family could just enjoy the place and where I could oversee the repairs I was paying for without juggling everyone else's vacation plans. I framed it as compensation for my investment and effort in saving the cabin from literally falling apart. I explained this to them calmly, thinking it was a reasonable compromise given the alternative: selling. Their reaction was immediate and explosive. Sarah started crying, saying I was kicking them out of their own family home. She accused me of being selfish and greedy, of using the repairs as an excuse to hoard the cabin for myself. She said I was destroying the family by taking away the place where we connect. She brought up all the memories and said I was denying her kids the chance to make their own memories there that summer. Tom was equally angry, though less emotional. He said I was being unfair, that I couldn't just unilaterally decide they didn't get to use the cabin for an entire season. He said I was holding the repairs over their heads and leveraging my better financial position to screw them over. He accused me of acting like I owned the place outright, just because I did more work. He said he had been planning to rely on the cabin for their summer vacation because they couldn't afford to go anywhere else, and now I was ruining their plans. The arguments have been relentless since I told them this a few weeks ago. Phone calls turning into shouting matches, angry texts, passive-aggressive emails, Sarah is telling extended family, cousins, aunts, that I'm trying to cut her and Tom out of the cabin entirely, which isn't true. I explicitly said this was for one summer, and access would resume next year, assuming we could figure out a better management plan going forward, which honestly feels impossible now. Tom is refusing to speak to me directly, only sending angry messages through Sarah. They say I'm the a-hole for several reasons, taking away their access for an entire summer, especially when one sibling relies on it for affordable vacation, making a unilateral decision about a jointly owned property, leveraging my financial contribution to dictate terms, destroying family relationships and tradition. My perspective is I have been carrying the disproportionate burden of maintaining this property for years, enabling them to enjoy it with minimal effort or cost. I am funding a massive critical repair that they couldn't or wouldn't pay for, which is necessary to preserve the cabin for all of us in the long run. The cabin will be a construction zone for a good chunk of the summer anyway, making normal vacation use difficult or impossible and potentially unsafe. This exclusive use period is fair compensation for my significant financial outlay and continued labor coordination on this project. I am not selling or changing ownership. This is a temporary measure because they failed to contribute to necessary upkeep. Maybe I could have handled the conversation better, but the underlying issue, that I handle everything and they contribute little but expect equal access, has been festering for years, and they've ignored every attempt I've made to address it collaboratively. This was, in my eyes, the only way to ensure the crucial repairs happened, without either losing the cabin entirely or me going bankrupt funding it for their equal benefit without any concession. So, am I the a-hole for telling my siblings I'm taking exclusive use of our jointly owned family cabin for one summer season because I'm paying for and managing extensive necessary foundation repairs that they couldn't or wouldn't contribute to? I'm honestly just completely drained and questioning everything right now. The past few weeks have been pure hell, and it all blew up because I said no, which apparently makes me the worst person in our family. I need outside perspectives because my head is spinning, and I don't know if I'm being reasonable or truly as cold and selfish as everyone is telling me I am. My sister, Sarah, is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, we were close but very different. I was always the one who was a bit more cautious, focused on my studies, maybe a bit of a planner. Sarah was more impulsive, artistic, social, and frankly, struggled a bit with responsibility. Our parents were good people, worked hard but weren't wealthy. They managed to give us both decent childhoods, but there wasn't a safety net, not a significant one anyway. After high school, I went straight to university on a combination of scholarships and working multiple jobs. I student loaned the rest. I lived frugally, shared cramped apartments, ate a lot of ramen, and focused relentlessly on getting a good degree and starting my career. I worked my butt off, often pulling all-nighters, sacrificing social events, sometimes barely sleeping. For days during busy periods, it paid off. I landed a decent entry-level job, kept my head down, worked even harder, got promotions, and slowly, over about 15 years, built a really comfortable life for myself. I'm not rich, not private jet rich, but I'm financially secure. I own my home outright, paid off the mortgage aggressively. I have a substantial retirement fund, investments, and I can afford things that were once unimaginable. Travel, nice meals out hobbies, and the peace of mind that comes with not worrying about bills. My husband David is also financially responsible, and together we built this life. We don't have kids, which is a factor here, I think. Sarah took a different path. She went to community college for a year but dropped out. She fell in love young, got married in her early 20s, and started having kids pretty quickly. She has 3, Mark 20, Emily 18, and Liam 15. Her husband Tom works, but it's always been a lower-paying job with inconsistent hours. Sarah jumped between various part-time jobs over the years, but nothing stable or high-paying. They've always struggled financially, always. There's been numerous times over the years where I've helped out, small loans I never expected back, helping them with a car repair, buying Christmas presents for the kids when they couldn't afford it, or just sending them money for groceries when things were particularly tight. It wasn't huge amounts, maybe adding up to a few thousand over 2 decades, but it was consistent, quiet help whenever I could manage it, without impacting my own financial goals. I never begrudged it. They were family, and I had more than they did. Our parents passed away a few years ago, relatively close together. Their estate was modest. They left their small house, which was sold, and some savings. They divided it equally between Sarah and me. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $100K each after everything was settled. For me, it was a nice bonus, something I invested. For Sarah, it was a lifeline. She used most of it to pay off accumulated debt. Credit cards, payday loans, the kind of debt that traps you. Buy a much-needed newer used car and put a little aside. I hoped it would give them a fresh start, a chance to get on top of things. It didn't. Within a couple of years, they were back in the same boat, maybe worse. More debt, struggling to keep up with bills. Liam, their youngest, had some health issues that cost a bit, but honestly a lot of it seems to stem from just poor management. Impulse purchases, not budgeting, living slightly beyond their means and financing the gap with high interest. Debt. Sarah has also developed some expensive habits, like buying designer knockoffs or always having the latest phone, things I know they can't truly afford. I've tried gently suggesting budgeting apps, offering to help them set one up, or talking about financial planning. But Sarah always gets defensive, saying I don't understand how hard their life is or that it's easy for me to talk because I have money. Which brings me to the current crisis. Their oldest son, Mark, is 20. He finished high school 2 years ago and has been working minimum wage jobs inconsistently. He wants to go to a 4-year university now. He's been accepted to a state school that's reasonably priced, but it's still expensive. Tuition, room and board, fees, books. It adds up. Sarah called me last month, sounding desperate. She explained Mark's situation and then dropped the bomb. She needed $50,000, not a loan, not a small gift. $50,000. I was stunned. I asked what it was for. She said it was primarily to cover Mark's first year's tuition and living expenses, plus pay off about $10K of their most pressing debt so they could breathe a little, and maybe help him out more in subsequent years. She said they had no savings, couldn't get loans for that amount, and their credit was shot. She framed it as a family obligation, that since I don't have kids, I don't have these expenses, and my extra money should help her kids, who are my niece and nephew. She said parents are supposed to help their children get started, and since she can't fully, I should step in. She talked about how hard Mark has worked. He pulled his grades up in the last 2 years, which is true, and how this is his only chance. Took a deep breath and told her that $50,000 is a huge amount of money, not something I can just hand over. I explained that while I could technically access that amount from my investments or savings, that money is earmarked for my own future security, for potential health issues down the line, for retirement, for being able to live comfortably without having to worry about money in my older age. It's money I worked incredibly hard for, sacrificed a lot to save and grow. I told her I wasn't going to give her $50,000. She immediately became upset. Accused me of being selfish, heartless, hoarding my wealth while her family struggles. She said I'd forgotten where I came from, that I act like I'm better than her because I have money. She brought up things I had done for her years ago, small, stuff like driving her somewhere or helping her move once, and twisted them into massive sacrifices she had made for me, implying I owed her. She even said our parents would be ashamed of me for not helping family. That one stung. I tried to be calm. I told her I understood her desperation, but this wasn't the solution. I suggested alternatives. Mark could go to the local community college for 2 years to save money and get his associate's degree before transferring to the state university. This is a very common, sensible path many students take, especially when money is tight. I offered to pay for his community college tuition and books for those 2 years, provided he keeps his grades up. I also offered to help Mark explore scholarships and grants, help him with FAFSA applications, and even help him find a good part-time job near campus. I said I could give them, Sarah and Tom, a smaller sum, maybe a few thousand, to help with their immediate debt if they committed to working. With a non-profit credit counseling service, I knew to get their finances in order. My offer was summarily rejected. Sarah scoffed at the community college idea, saying Mark deserved to go straight to a 4-year university. that starting at community college would make him a second-class student, and he'd fall behind. She said my offer of help was paltry, compared to what I obviously have. She refused the debt counseling suggestion, saying they didn't need lectures, they needed money. The call ended with her yelling that I was a terrible sister and a terrible person, and that she never wanted to speak to me again unless I came to my senses and helped her family properly. Since then, the floodgates have opened. Sarah has evidently been talking to other family members. My Aunt Carol called me, expressing her disappointment that I wasn't stepping up for my nephew. She said family is everything, and that I should be helping Sarah and Tom out more, especially since they've had such a tough time. My cousin Debbie messaged me on Facebook, calling me a hoarder and saying it's disgusting how much I have while my sister is struggling. Even my parents' old neighbor, who I barely know, apparently heard about it and made sympathetic comments to Sarah about how some people get lucky and forget their roots. It feels like a coordinated attack. They are all presenting it as me, the wealthy, childless sister, refusing to help the struggling, sacrificing sister with kids. They emphasize how much I have and how little Sarah has, implying that difference alone is reason enough for me to fork over a substantial part of my savings. They ignore the years of hard work and careful planning that went into my financial situation, and they ignore the chronic poor financial decisions that contributed to Sarah's. They make it sound like I just stumbled into wealth and am now callously withholding it from family. My husband David is firmly on my side. He says I work too hard for my money to just hand it over, especially when there are serious doubts about how it would be managed and when I offered realistic, if less flashy, alternatives. He says 50,000 isn't a small amount to just give away, and that doing so would be enabling Sarah's poor financial habits and setting a precedent for future demands. He points out that Mark is an adult and should be participating in financing his own education through loans, part-time work and scholarships, just like I did, and millions of other students do. But hearing it from so many family members, even distant ones, is starting to get to me. Am I being too harsh? Is the fact that I can technically afford it a moral obligation to just give the money, even if I disagree with the request and the circumstances? Should I prioritize my niece and nephew's opportunities over my own long-term financial security and retirement plans? Is it truly selfish to hold on to money I earned when family is in need, even if that need feels partly self-inflicted? The "our parents would be ashamed" comment really landed hard. I keep thinking about it. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I've become too detached, too focused on money, and forgotten what family is supposed to be about, so I'm putting it out there anonymously, to people who don't know any of us. Am I the a-hole for refusing to give my sister $50,000 for her son's college and her debt, and instead offering alternative, less costly forms of help? Okay, so here's the situation. I, 34F, just got married last weekend to my now husband, David, 36 ma'am. We had a beautiful wedding, about 150 guests, reception at a nice hotel ballroom. Everything was going pretty smoothly, honestly, until things got, well, loud. For context, I have pretty significant sensory processing issues, particularly with noise and crowds. Large, echoing spaces with lots of competing sounds, music, talking, laughter, clinking glasses, can quickly become overwhelming for me to the point of triggering panic attacks. It's not something I can just power through or ignore. It's like my brain can't filter, and everything assaults me at once, making it impossible to focus, think, or even just be. Because of this, a traditional, loud, boisterous wedding reception was something I was dreading, even though I desperately wanted to celebrate with our friends and family. We talked about eloping, a small destination wedding, but David really wanted the big family celebration, and honestly, there were people I wanted to include too. We compromised by ensuring there was a plan for my sensory needs. Our venue had several smaller adjoining rooms off the main ballroom. During planning, I negotiated to use one of these rooms as a designated quiet zone. We put a lot of effort into setting this up. We rented comfortable armchairs and small sofas, had soft lighting, put out books, magazines, quiet puzzles, and a few boxes of sensory-friendly fidget toys. There were water stations and some light, non-messy snacks. Crucially, we had clear signage made, quiet zone, a space for relaxation and calm, Please use hush-it tones. No loud talking, music, or active play. The entrance to the room was monitored by a friendly usher for the first hour to gently remind people of the purpose if needed. We mentioned the quiet zone on our wedding website under the venue information section, explaining its purpose for guests who might need a break from the noise and energy of the reception, phrasing it inclusively for anyone needing a quieter space, not just explicitly for my needs, though that was the primary driver. We also included a small note card on each reception table explaining the room and its guidelines. The reception started. The main ballroom was exactly as expected. Vibrant, loud music, people chatting and laughing. And, just as I feared, about an hour in, I started feeling the familiar tightness in my chest, the buzzing in my ears, the feeling of being completely overwhelmed. I excused myself and went to the quiet zone. It was exactly what I needed. A few other guests were there. One older couple quietly reading, a woman doing a crossword, another guest with headphones on. The atmosphere was calm, peaceful, a complete contrast to the main room. I sat there for about 15 minutes, feeling myself decompress, the panic starting to recede. Then, my mother-in-law, Carol, 60F, and her sister, Brenda, 58F, burst into the room. They were loud, laughing raucously, and instantly killed the peaceful vibe. They pulled 2 armchairs together right in the middle of the room, nowhere near the entrance where the sign was prominent, and started talking over each other about some recent family drama at what felt like shouting volume compared to the quiet hum of the room. A few of the guests already in the quiet zone visibly flinched and exchanged uncomfortable glances. The woman with the crossword cleared her throat pointedly. Carol and Brenda completely ignored them. They continued their loud conversation, interspersed with bursts of laughter. My anxiety, which had just started to subside, flared right back up. This was supposed to be my safe space, and it was being completely disregarded by the very people who knew, or should know, my struggles best. David had explained my sensory issues to his parents, though maybe not the full extent. I walked over to them, trying to keep my voice calm despite my rising panic. "Carol, Brenda," I said softly, "could you please lower your voices? This is the quiet zone." Carol waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be silly, dear. We're just talking." "It's a wedding, people talk." "I know." I tried again, my voice starting to tremor slightly. "But this room is specifically for people needing a break from the noise. The signs explain it's a quiet space. We put it here so people can decompress." Brenda scoffed. "Decompress? It's a party. If you want quiet, you should have stayed home. That hurt a lot." Here I was, trying to manage a condition so I could be present at my own wedding, and they were mocking it and actively disrupting the safe space I'd created. "No," I said, my voice firmer now, but still quiet. "This room has a purpose, and that purpose is quiet. We communicated this clearly. If you want to have a loud conversation, you need to go back to the main ballroom." Carol's face hardened. "Are you kicking us out? At your wedding? We're family." "I'm not kicking you out of the wedding," I explained, feeling tears welling up from the stress and frustration. "I'm asking you to respect the purpose of this room. If you can't be quiet, yes, you need to leave this specific room." This caused a scene. Carol stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. David, come here." She started shouting for David, who was in the main ballroom. Brenda joined in, yelling about how I was being a bridezilla and inhospitable. David rushed in, looking confused and concerned. Carol immediately started telling him loudly how I was being awful, trying to dictate where they could talk, kicking them out of a room. I was shaking by this point. "David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "they're being loud in the quiet zone. I asked them to be quiet or leave the room, and they're making a scene. This was supposed to be my break space." David looked between me, teary and clearly distressed, and his red-faced mother and aunt. "Mom, Aunt Brenda," he said, trying to sound reasonable. "She's right. This room is for quiet. You need to either lower your voices or go back to the main room." Carol was absolutely livid. "I cannot believe this. My own son, taking her side. Fine, we'll leave. We'll just leave this awful, ungrateful wedding." She stormed out, pulling a still grumbling Brenda with her. They didn't actually leave the venue entirely. They just went back to the main ballroom, where I could see them across the room giving me daggers for the rest of the night. The atmosphere in the quiet zone, however, slowly returned to calm after they left, and I was able to stay for a bit longer and regain my composure before attempting the rest of the reception. The next day my phone started blowing up. Carol and Brenda have apparently been telling everyone who will listen that I ruined their night, humiliated them, and was a cruel bridezilla for kicking family out of my wedding for just talking. Several other guests have called David or me, saying they think I overreacted, that it's unreasonable to expect total silence at a wedding, and that I should have just let them talk or found another place for myself. They say the quiet zone was a nice idea, but I shouldn't have enforced the rules so strictly, especially not with family, and that I made things awkward and caused a huge argument that upset people. David is incredibly supportive and says I was absolutely justified in defending my space and my needs on my wedding day, especially after all the effort we put into making the room available and communicating its purpose. He thinks his mom and aunt were deliberately disrespectful because they thought the whole concept was silly, but the fallout has been significant. Carol is threatening not to speak to us, Brenda is posting passive-aggressive things online, and other family members are whispering. It makes me doubt myself. Was I too rigid? Should I have just put up with the noise in that moment to avoid the conflict? Was my need for a quiet space less important than their desire to be loud? So, am I the a-hole for asking my mother-in-law and her sister to leave the designated quiet zone at my wedding when they were being disruptive, leading to a big scene and ongoing family drama? Am I the a-hole for moving my roommate's collection of tiny figurines off the coffee table? Okay, this is going to be long, but I feel like I need to explain everything because I'm losing my mind, and I honestly don't know if I am the unreasonable one here or if my roommate is overreacting to an insane degree. I live with one roommate, let's call him Alex. We've lived together for maybe 2.5 years now. The first year was great. Pretty standard roommate stuff. We got along fine, respected each other's space and boundaries. Over the last year or so, things have gotten tense. It's mostly revolved around shared spaces and Alex's ever-expanding collection of, well, stuff. Specifically, small decorative figurines. Alex collects these tiny, detailed figurines. They're from various fandoms, games, obscure franchises, whatever. Individually, they're kind of neat. Some are pretty well made. The problem is the sheer quantity and where they end up. Initially, they were just on a shelf in Alex's room. Then they migrated to a desktop in the shared office space we barely use. Then they started creeping into the living room. At first, it was just 1 or 2 on the mantelpiece. Fine. Then a few appeared on a side table. Okay, whatever. But over the last 6 months, it's escalated dramatically. They're now on every available surface in the living room. The mantelpiece is covered, the side tables are full, the top of the bookshelf is lined with them, and most significantly, the coffee table. Our coffee table is a reasonably sized, functional piece of furniture. We use it for drink as snacks, putting our feet up sometimes with a tray, playing board games, puzzles, or just setting down a book or remote. Lately, it's become primarily a display case for Alex's figurines. They've multiplied. I'd estimate there were probably 10-15 spread across the surface of the coffee table, taking up about 60-70% of the usable area. They're small, detailed, and frankly fragile looking. This means you have to be incredibly careful putting anything down. Setting down a mug requires finding a clear spot and lowering it like you're diffusing a bomb. Want to put a plate of snacks down while watching TV? Good luck finding space that isn't either covered in figures or the one minuscule coaster Alex uses, which inevitably has figures clustered around it anyway. Doing a puzzle on the table. Impossible without moving a dozen figures first. It's been building resentment in me for a while. It feels like a shared functional space is being unilateral, turned into a personal display area at the expense of its actual utility. I've tried talking about it indirectly before, like, wow, your collection is really growing, huh? It's taking over. Or, careful putting that down, don't want to knock over one of Alex's guys. These hints were completely ignored or met with a cheerful, yep, pretty cool, right? Never acknowledgement of the space issue. I even tried more directly. Hey, do you think maybe some of these could go on a shelf instead? It's getting a bit crowded on the table. The response was something like, "They look good there and they're not bothering anyone," which clearly they were bothering me because they made the table unusable. I considered asking Alex to move them all, or at least the ones on the coffee table, to a less obtrusive location like the top of the bookshelf, or even proposing we get a dedicated display shelf for their collection that they could put in a corner, maybe a narrow one. But Alex is very sensitive about his collection and also generally resistant to any changes to how he does things. Past, smaller roommate conflicts have always ended with me backing down or compromising more because arguing with Alex is exhausting. He gets defensive, raises his voice, and makes it feel like a personal attack on his character or interests. So yesterday evening, I came into the living room and the coffee table was particularly bad. Alex had apparently gotten a few new figures and arranged them prominently right in the center. There was barely any flat surface left that wasn't either covered in figures or crumbs from something Alex had eaten earlier and not wiped up. Another recurring, though less central, issue. I just looked at it and felt this wave of frustration wash over me. The table, the primary central surface in our shared living room, was functionally useless for its intended purpose because of this collection. Without overthinking it, I decided to just fix it. I grabbed a small empty decorative tray that was on the side table, carefully gathered only the figurines that were on the coffee table, maybe 5 or 6 of the smaller ones, and placed them neatly together on the tray. I then took the tray and placed it on the same side table where I got the tray from, a table that was otherwise mostly empty except for a lamp and a couple of books. It was literally a move of about 5 feet, from one shared surface to another shared surface nearby. I didn't move any figures from the mantelpiece or the other side table. I didn't hide them. I didn't put them in Alex's room. I moved them from the functional center of the shared room to a less functional, more display-oriented edge of the shared room. It took maybe 30 seconds. The coffee table was instantly clear and usable again. I felt a sense of relief. Finally, I could put my water bottle down without playing Jenga. About an hour later, Alex came into the living room. Within minutes, he noticed the figures were gone from the coffee table. He immediately started shouting, not asking, but shouting. "Where are my figures? Did you touch my figures?" I calmly said, "Yeah, I moved the ones from the coffee table. They're over there on the side table." I explained my reasoning. The coffee table was unusable. I moved them to make the space functional again. I put them on a nearby shared surface. I didn't damage them or hide them. This is where it escalated, wildly. Alex absolutely lost it. He accused me of having zero respect for his property, of being passive-aggressive because I didn't ask him first, of violating his personal space by touching his things, and of trying to erase his presence. From the living room, he said I was controlling and acting like the space was only mine. He yelled that the figures weren't hurting anyone and that I could have just used a coaster or put things around them. He kept repeating that I had no right to touch his stuff without permission. I was trying to stay calm but got frustrated. I said that while they are his figures, the coffee table is a shared piece of furniture in a shared living room, and its primary purpose is not a display case. I argued that his collection had expanded to the point of negatively impacting the shared utility of the space, and that moving a few items from one shared surface to another, nearby shared surface for the sake of functionality, was a reasonable action when direct communication about the clutter hadn't worked. I told him it felt unfair for him to prioritize his personal display needs over the shared practical use of the room. He wasn't hearing it. He just kept yelling about how I should have asked how I disrespected him, how this was a hostile act. He went into his room, then came back out and ostentatiously grabbed the tray with the figures and moved them back onto the coffee table, spreading them out even more than they were before, practically edge to edge. He also grabbed a few more figures from a shelf in his room and added them to the coffee table display, saying something like, "Fine, if you hate them so much, you'll have to live with them." Since then, he's been giving me the silent treatment. He slams doors when moving between rooms. I've seen him posting vague, dramatic things on social media about people who don't respect artists or living with control freaks who try to dictate your life. The atmosphere in the apartment is incredibly thick and unpleasant. Now I'm sitting here second-guessing myself. Should I have just tolerated the unusable coffee table? Was it really that bad? Was moving them without asking permission crossing a line, even if they were in a shared space? Was my action passive-aggressive? Maybe I should have tried one more direct conversation, even though past attempts were unsuccessful. I was just so fed up in the moment and thought I was making a minor, sensible adjustment, but the level of fury it provoked makes me wonder if I seriously misjudged the situation or my actions. I feel like Alex is being completely unreasonable and turning a trivial thing into a massive drama, but maybe my method of handling it was wrong. So am I the a-hole?